If you have seen a company crash and burn because the one guy who knew left, what was the important skill information and what happened without them? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Maybe not crash and burned, but there was a guy who was close personal friends with the CEO. He owned so much company stock that if he sold his shares, it had to be cleared with board of directors and filed with the SEC Rule 144 as a registered secondary offering. Well, the company got bought out, which included trading his shares. If he sold, it would have been really bad for the stock prices, so they gave him whatever job he wanted, and he worked with me. He was unfireable. After a few years, some hotshot young manager fired him. The reasons were long and stupid, but it boiled down to, I don't like his attitude. Instead of saying, "Ha, you can't fire me," he said, "Okay," and filed a registration statement to sell his shares. I don't know how much he made, but it was more than 90 million. It was his right. The board was forced to approve it. He paid taxes and retired in his 40s. The company's stock price fell about 15 that week. That manager was fired, presumably out of a cannon. Answer: I don't know how many times I've seen a well-run organization, everyone knowing their roles and proficient at them, have a new manager come in and make changes for no reason just because he had the power to do so. One guy had a group of desks surrounded by glass walls to separate those workers from the others who had a different supervisor. The newly enclosed desks had all their computers shut down because of the heat that built up in the confined space. Down came the walls. Money partied too hard. Story 2. The Coors Company has long made ceramic lab filters. They custom made a large version of the mass-produced lab filters, and we had one at my company. We wanted another one, so we placed an order. We were told that X retired and no one else could make them that large without cracking. X apparently could not impart whatever he did to others. I have no idea if they gave up on making them as we switched to a different type after that. Maybe it was just a tall tale. Answer: honestly, I can believe that might be the case. Industrial ceramics do involve a lot estimates and empirical rules in their manufacturing, since you can get a decent amount of material differences from lot to lot. When talking about something as specialized as a large lab filter, I can believe that the forming and firing of them was based on feel more than any hard and fast rules. So, X probably spent 20 years working out how to do it by feel, but converting that into a strict process that anyone could follow wouldn't be easy. Story 3. The guy who knew the clients, had relationships with the clients, who had the history of the clients, the company. They got rid of that guy, and what a no. Clients started bailing because they didn't like how they were being treated, and the guy who could smooth ruffled feathers wasn't there. Answer: we had a guy at our company who had tons of customers who only used us because he was working for us. He was super loyal to the company. So when another company tried to poach him from us, he threw down a ridiculous offer he didn't think they would accept. And they did. Unfortunately, loyalty only goes so far because he would have been stupid to not accept an offer that was more than double his current position. The department he was in has still not recovered 5 years later. Story 4. There was a printing shop that was around forever. The owner knew everyone in the business. He found out he could get a contract to print and fold small instruction sheets for a medicine, a huge contract to print millions of these things. He knew the guy who had the printer, another guy had the cutter, and another had the folder. These machines were not being used. He bought all 3 pieces without letting anyone find out about his contract, so he got them cheap. Then he set it all up for continuous feed, and he had one well-paid guy running the entire thing. He made the investment back in the first print run, and then it was a big moneymaker. Then he sold the business and retired. The new owner saw one guy running this one print job. He thought all the guy was doing was feeding in paper and stacking the product from the other end. Obviously, he was being overpaid for this, so he let that guy go and hired a cheaper hand to just put in the paper and stack the product. Well, that operator he let go was not just doing that. The 3 machines needed adjusting. Someone had to watch it. Someone who had the kind of experience that you can't simply train someone to do. As the printer might be picking up paper a little off center, you turn a knob to about here, and if the folder is not creasing just right, then you move a lever to about there. It was always checking and adjusting a little when needed. The operator simply got another high-skill job at another print shop. Without the experienced operator, the entire thing went off the rails. The product didn't pass. He lost the contract, and that was a lot of the shop's revenue at the time. It didn't take long after that for the new owner to crash a 45-year-old business. Answer: electrician here. I wired an antique press for a customer a few years back that when purchased came with its operator. This guy had to be in his 70s, so I really hope they hired a trainee to work under him to learn the ins and outs of it. This press wasn't very large, but had a dedicated specialization, which I think was the ability to inlay gold leaf patterns into the paper. The value of knowledge and experience should never be underestimated. Story 5. An absolute star in an engineering company who, despite growing his side of the business, increasing efficiency, cutting costs, and gaining additional relevant training and qualifications in his own time, hadn't had a meaningful pay rise in 5 years. Gave notice after accepting a new position with a 60 pay increase, and the company immediately countered with an 80 pay rise offer. That they knew his worth the entire time and refused to pay until they had to enrage him so much that they turned an amicable separation into a hostile one. He came after their clients with a vengeance, and while I think the company still exists, it's a lot smaller than before. Answer: while at my last work, I paid for some training out of my own pocket to be able to better support clients. My boss at the time expressed dissatisfaction because he was concerned that our competitors would steal me because now I was worth more. It was at that moment that I decided to leave. Took my time getting offers, and when I finally handed in my resignation, he asked me what they'd offered me. Roughly 2x what I was being paid. Had the gall to tell me I'm worth more than that. Like, if you thought that, why were you paying me so poorly then? Went from I'll be willing to provide consulting services for the difficult co-figs I'd done to me, removing comments because fudge him and his business. Last I heard, they were bleeding clients and had been forced to downsize. Story 6. Not a crash and burn, but almost a critical system failure. New management came in and they were reviewing payments to outside labor and contracts and such. They found one such payment annually paid to a fella out west. The payment was $20K a year. They asked the wrong people and decided this was not necessary and canceled the payments and retainer. Apparently this guy was some expert co-writer for a system long out of use, but very much in use by my company. Kind of like those memes you see in the IT world showing how all of this critical infrastructure relies on some small antiquated software no one knows about. IT found out later they were never asked or involved in the decision. They basically said, without this dude, we are fudge. Management cut the check and he's on retainer. Story 7. Got rid of the CEO that actually took care of employees and grew the company exponentially. Explanation given was that they needed someone who could steward the company at that level. Really, the major investor company wanted to have their own guy in there. They threw around a bunch of pie-in-the-sky promises about an IPO, which was never going to happen. The people they successively brought in slashed and burned everything that made the place great. Got so bad we were forbidden from sending company-wide goodbye emails, which were par of the course in the past. They tried to reverse course on some stuff to stem the tide, but damage was done. Also, all the changes in leadership meant the product strategy was non-existent, and something that was the new flagship one year was deprecated the next. They are still plugging along, but a shell of what they O&FE were. Many people who made the place great saw the writing on the wall and got out of Dodge. Answer: saw the same thing happen at a mid-sized food service company. Owner company leadership got to stick up their jerk because profits had been used to grow the company 10x instead of line their pockets over the final 2 years. They brought in some ladder climber exec from a soda company and ousted the CEO that had given them record years of growth and decent profit. Still profiting, just also reinvesting. Most of the senior execs left with the previous CEO, and it was downhill from there. Story 8. I make a product that requires a high-quality bottle and cap. During COVID, supplies were getting scarce. I secured some bottles, albeit lesser quality, but caps were a nightmare. I called my way up the supply chain. Ended up talking to the owner of the biggest manufacturer of the caps I need in America. Turns out they're completely shut down. There's one guy in Slovakia that can fix and service their machine. He can't travel because of COVID. I asked with a mildly condescending tone, is there a manual? Or can you FaceTime with this guy? Stonewalled. He's the only guy and we're waiting for him. Luckily, he didn't die and came to America to fix the machine 8 weeks later. Answer: this is way more common than you realize. I work at a company that is very good at getting parts. Even if they are discontinued, we can find you a suitable replacement. There have been times where we have put the one dude who can install it on a plane from Washington to Florida, part in hand, and they then fixed the machine and flew back home right away. Story 9. There's a notable difference in the quality of asphalt used in Oregon highways since my grandpa passed away. He retired twice and stayed on as a consultant until the day he died. They called my grandma after he died, and when she told them he had passed, she said they seemed more broken up about it than she was after 40 years of marriage? Answer: kind of the same happened with my grandpa. He worked for our national energy company for decades. He was never an engineer. Technically, he had never even gotten a high school diploma because of the war, but he was one of the most brilliant people I have ever met. They took him on as a technician in the afterwar period and then basically promoted him as high as they could without him having a degree. His fingerprints were all over a lot of the hydroelectric and nuclear power plants from that era, before Chernobyl. After retiring, he didn't become an official consultant, but he kept getting a constant pilgrimage of electrical engineers coming to his house in the middle of nowhere with a problem to solve or piece of old tech they needed explained. Grandma kept getting calls after he died for a while. In a way, it was nice to know how important he had been. Story 10. I left my former employer as the foreman at a hardscape company to start my own outfit a year and a half ago. The company is shutting down after this year. It turns out people with 10 years in the industry are basically non-existent. No one remembers to take care of their bodies. And when you offer shoot pay to start, you'll get shoot help. They simply could not replace me, and they couldn't afford my new self-imposed salary to get me back on board. Part of me feels guilty to watch them struggle, but man, has my life improved since leaving. The moral of the story is that if your company relies on a single person to operate, you're probably doing something wrong. Answer: I notice this in a lot of design jobs that have a physical aspect to them. Always shoot pay with no benefits. Strict graphic design office jobs tend to be better paid. Ones that require you lift 60 raw beers and actually physically product whatever you're churning out in Illustrator Photoshop pay barely above M in wage. I genuinely don't get it. And yes, I'm calling out every wrap vinyl sign installer in the United States, especially fast signs. You're on notice. Story 11. A software engineer I worked with had developed nearly every module for our company's warehouse management system. He left after 30 years and then things started to break that no one knew how to fix. Warehouses were down for nearly a week while he negotiated his return. I don't know what his salary ended up being, but he did have every June and July off, and we had a software deployment blackout during those months as a result. Story 12. Had a guy at one job that landed us our largest client ever, Ford Motor Company. Ever heard of them? A $22 million software contract. They fired him immediately after the ink was dry on a trumped-up bullshit, not a team player thing to screw him out of there, paying his percentage for the sale. Company never found another big client after that, and 6 months later, the layoff started. Answer: this is so similar to what my company did a few months ago. We had a sales rep acquire the literal largest possible client in our industry, a gold client for over a decade. After the multi-million-dollar agreement was almost solidified, the sales rep was fired for literally no reason other than did not align with company culture. The client loved her and didn't like the move our company pulled, so they backed out. Still cracks me up to this day. How can you be so stupid? Story 13. Lol, it was my dad. He was the lead software engineer for the biggest client. The company he worked at built automation equipment, and they did work for a certain large glass manufacturer. They absolutely loved him. Corporate removed the GM of his branch, and he got a bad feeling from the new guy. So he left, and they lost that main customer within 6 months. The branch closed down less than a year after that. Answer: this happened to me. My buddy was the lead developer for a project. He ended up hiring a bunch of his friends to help with development. I was one of the friends. The company started treating us poorly and prioritizing management and other aspects of the business over us, even though we developed and maintained the product. At one point, they made us all share an office while managers got their own offices, so we all just said fudge it and left for other jobs. The project tanked hard and is on its way to failure. Story 14. I read a story a while back, but I can't find it, so hopefully I don't butcher it. There was a guy who worked at a sausage, hot dog factory. His job was to push the carts full of sausages from the production area to the smokehouse. Eventually, his job was automated out and he was let go, but the quality of the product went downhill. Nobody could figure out why the sausages had different flavor and texture. It was realized that the time it took for the guy to push the cart to the smokehouse was essential in the process. They hired the guy back and had him push the sausages through a winding corridor to mimic the time it would have taken him to traverse his old route. The sausages immediately got their flavor and texture back. When he finally retired, they had to automate his job by having the sausages traverse a time-based path. I think they named the machine after him. I thought it was a fun story. Sorry I can't find the original. Maybe someone else can. Edit. Thanks everyone for the link to the story. It's such a wonderful reminder about how any job can make a huge impact on people. It just might not be as obvious as this one. Take pride in what you do, no matter how big or small, because it is making an impact to someone. Answer: That's along the lines of the Japanese breakfast sausage company that took off. Then once they got big, they changed packaging and sales tanked. The managers followed the customers from the stores and found everyone was using the little beef sticks as the stylus on their tablets on the subway on their way to work, then snacking on their way in the door. When they changed from the cheap wrapper style that was conductive to the blister pack style, it left a rough plastic edge so they didn't work on tablets anymore. Story 15. Apparently I was this guy and I didn't even know it. I worked for an MSP, generic IT company, and was like the fourth employee. I was there for maybe 2-ish years, and by that time we were about 15 people strong. The company had a lot of good paying clients, and I knew the intricacies of every single one of them. My job was to drive to each client once a week and do whatever IT tasks they needed to have done. Migrate an email server to the cloud? Done. Reset Karen's password again? Done. Replace the toner in the office printer? Done. I was basically contacted to do anything and everything they needed, IT related. Before I was hired, my job was done by the 2 guys who started the company, and when they brought me on, they took a more administrative approach to grow the business. I loved my job. I didn't have to go to the same office every day. I had a company truck, company credit card to pay for gas, and freedom to take my time and do what needed to be done on my schedule. Eventually, the company grew too big and supported too many clients for just me to handle, so we hired more and more techs. However, I was by far the most experienced and technical person on the team, aside from the founders. After about 2 years, I had a friend who worked at AWS reach out to me and suggested I apply to work there, so I did. And then I got the job. My current pay at the MSP was $42K a year, and my job offer at Amazon was $80K with a $20K signing bonus, moving package, and stock options. So yup, I took the job and left the MSP. About 8 months later, the MSP fell apart. Apparently, none of the other techs made my regular clients happy. One of the founders tried to do my job and quickly realized how much work I actually did for them. He realized it wasn't sustainable and couldn't keep up with the work. He told his business partner they had to hire like 3 more people to do my job, but the partner said they couldn't afford it. Clients started getting upset at the subpar service from other techs, and one of the founding partners quit. In less than a year, the company went under, and the other partner founder moved north, California, to become a sommelier. At no point did I ever expect to be the downfall of that company. Answer: yeah, that is how MSPs work. I got hired at one right out of college for $16.50 an hour. 3 years later, during COVID, I was in a unique role, only I handled triage for every case coming into help desk, e-discovery searches, managing the email filters, and at $19 an hour. We got acquired and I was told they would actually name my position, so I wasn't listed as level 1 help desk. A year later, after the migration, no title change. Found out the new hires I was training with no experience and no degree were getting hired on at more than I was paid. Told the boss I needed more money and they eventually bumped me to, I think, $24 an hour. I went back a year later and told them I needed at least $28 an hour and was told they couldn't do that. After we got bought, all the decent techs were jumping ship. 4 months later, I got hired at the same place 2 of them went to. $78K salary. They pay my health insurance premiums, stock options, separate sick time, 8 days a year, and vacation, 4 weeks, 12 the workload. They pay for any training I want to take, etc. Effectively a 50 pay increase, all the benefits they got rid of once we were bought. When I had my exit interview and cited the denied raise as the reason, I got told pay isn't everything. It may not be everything, but it's a whole lot. The rest is work-life balance, benefits, and the people. And they're all better here. Last I heard, their most experienced level 2 help desk technician burnt out and left. Played Catan with him and another fiend a few months back. He is living at home and working night shifts at Home Depot because that IT job burnt him out so bad. The only skilled technicians they can keep are the ones they hired with no degree or experience. Their only other senior level 2 tech keeps applying for other jobs, but only has 3 years experience in retail before with no degree. So he can't get hired. Once he has 5 years, he's probably gone too. After I had put my 2 weeks in, they flew one of the executives to give a rousing speech. We don't do this job for the money. We do it to support the customers. One of the most senior employees broke in with, I do it for the money. Can you let me know about raises and benefits? Every employee left that meeting pissed, and all of us were talking about it together. I got a lot of, you left at the right time, comments. Story 16. The official name is bus factor, or how many employees could get hit by a bus before the company can't operate. Answer: I just had a conversation with a guy I work for about this. The company I'm interning for had this problem in a major way. Their second in command was in charge of everything. Records, payroll, UHR, parts, systems. They left and the owner was gobsmacked at what they were actually doing. Lucky for them, they got everything turned around in about 8 months and trained at least 2 people for every role at the company. They are growing massively now, and while there are growing pains, they make a solid product that actually serves a need, unlike these BS tech companies. Don't even get me started on what my definition of product design is compared to what a job ad for a product designer is actually requesting. Anyway, I brought it up because even with redundancies in place, we had about 4 key people off this week, and it kind of had some negative effects. They were temporary, but it really shows that even with redundancies, you can find yourself in a world of shoot. Story 17. I was that guy. I worked for a company that provided services for buildings, the big high-rise ones, maintenance, repairs, etc. I was one of a 4-person team who did the pricing, FPA for contracts, reconciliation stuff, etc. nationally. Anyways, company got bought out by a competitor that wanted to gain some of our specializations, other ancillary services, and build better market dominance on the West Coast. My team basically left to another competitor on the spot without telling me, leaving me in charge of everything. I held on for about a year, all the while telling leadership that they needed to hire replacements. They never did. I tried taking vacation to prevent burnout, but was promptly denied. No one can cover you. I left the company, and last I heard, the company was losing contracts. I attribute this to the company's inability to get any other department to do what I and my ex-team did competently. To answer the OP's question directly, they lost years of domain knowledge on who our clients were, what their quirks were financially, risk knowledge, and generally knowledge about how our financial systems worked. Story 18. Back in the 60s, my dad drove a delivery route delivering eggs to restaurants and stores. One restaurant had a great cook. His cooking was widely known and the restaurant was always packed. He asked for a raise and was told that they couldn't afford it. Another restaurant offered him a substantial raise and he accepted. He had a growing family and needed the money. His former employer lost a lot of business and eventually closed. Answer. It baffles me in the restaurant industry how restaurateurs think. No one, and I mean no one, comes to a restaurant for the vibe or front of house. Seriously, I've gone to half burnt down places that were packed because the food is still good. Sure, front of house matters for ambiance and shoot, but no 5-star Michelin restaurant ever pissed off their cooks. But if someone makes a new restaurant, you always hear stories about, oh, we just need someone to flip the burgers. No, you need someone that makes amazing food. Story 19. My small town. They forced retirement so they could hire new people at lower wages. Of course, the only place that had accurate water distribution maps was in the head of a guy they forced to retire. This is 20 years ago, and they had to give him close to $50,000 to get him to come back and work with somebody to get the maps on paper. Story 20. My supervisor, head of department. I worked as a front-end dev in a very small and crappy marketing agency. My supervisor was not only our sole back-end dev, but also the responsible for managing client lists, our monthly phone messages to clients, and the entire server that housed all files. As soon as he left, I was just going to work without anything to do, and soon after the agency fell through. Story 21. Hello, El. Yeah, me. I went to work at a plastics plant, started as a forklift driver, learned how to make mixes, how the machines worked, how to maintain everything. I got promoted to maintenance, then to line manager, then plant manager. The plant was sold. New guy comes in, fires everyone, changes everything. He tried to hire me back at 75 of my former pay. I told him to kick rocks. He called me a week later and offered me my former position at the same pay. L told him I'd take a 10 raise. He hung up on me. He called me again the following week and agreed to my terms. The guy was an absolute jerk to work for. Finally, he pushed me too far, told me L had no idea what L was doing. I walked. He screamed at me when L left that L wasn't special, that he'd have me replaced before L got out of the parking lot. Over the next few weeks, L got a couple of calls from former co-workers telling me that everything was falling apart. Place went out of business in 6 months. Story 22. Hostile takeover, where the previous CEO and board was kicked out. During staffing decisions, one guy in the IT department got identified as only downloading the data from the server, anonymizing it, and then delegating it to the rest of the department for processing. Nothing we couldn't do ourselves, so they decided not to offer him a new contract. Previous CEO knew that guy was doing so little because he was actually the client. They were processing the data for who was very meticulous about keeping his client's data safe and anonymous. He was just technically an employee to make it easier for him to have an account with which to access the systems. So they immediately fired their biggest client. Story 23. When I worked for a major telecom, we had a manager who had come up through the union ranks. He had built and programmed a Unix system consisting of several PCs, which took messages from long-distance carriers, diagnosed the problems, referred the ticket to the appropriate work center, and when the problem was resolved and the ticket closed, tested the circuit again and sent it back to the long-distance carrier as resolved. But he did not have a college degree, and when the company decided that all managers had to have degrees, he was let go. Sadly, he was the only one that knew the system he had built in intimate detail. Myself and another tech could reboot the system, but if anything went wrong that didn't get resolved with a reboot, there wasn't anything we could do or would do, since neither of us was being paid for that job. Ultimately, the system died. 4 technicians were assigned to do the work the system had been doing for as long as it took the company to put out a request for a new system, take bids on it, etc., and get the new system built and installed, which it turns out it never was. Story 24. There was a dude. He'd been there 10 years when I got hired. I knew more about databases and they wanted to promote me into a lead role. I told them to promote him instead, and I'd help with the DB side. They didn't, he left. We were a creative space product that integrated with Photoshop. I don't know shoot about Photoshop. Company was bought, everyone was laid off except a skeleton crew to offshore all operations. Story 25. At one point, the company I work for, retail store, had a safe that was broken. Me, ASST manager, and my boss, store manager, knew how to get it open. There was a trick to it that took us weeks to get the hang of. It cost a lot to fix that safe, and we complained about it constantly because it was a nightmare to get open before we figured out the trick. The company refused to fix it for years. They said it was obviously working fine. Since we were able to open and close the store every day, there was no problem worth dropping that kind of money on. My boss quit eventually, unrelated to the safe, and then it took them over a year to replace him. I also quit within about 6 months because the two of us were keeping everything afloat. Without him, I was in hell. I didn't even realize the situation I created until 2 days after my final shift. The store is calling my cell phone. Left me a voicemail about how they haven't been able to get cash for 2 days because nobody can open the safe, and they wanted to know how I'd been doing it. I described it to them, but it's an hour away and I'm not going that far, and they couldn't understand. Also, if it was an ex-coworker calling me and asking, I might have helped more, but it was the corporate level regional manager filling in at the store, the guy who refused to drop the money to fix the safe in the first place, so I let him lie in his bed. It was my problem for years and it got slept on. Now that it's his problem for 2 days, it's an emergency. The store was down for cash sales for like a month till it got fixed. Story 26. We had an application that was very literally our bread and butter. It was the only application the entire company used to enter their data in. Everything that made us money went through this application. We were a company of about 200 and 2 IT teammates controlled the application. Only ones with admin access, only ones with any knowledge of how the thing worked, etc. We had been in the process of building a team to support it, but we never got that far. Company got bought out. They decided to cut the fat and let go everyone on the IT team except me, probably because I was the one making the least amount of money. I was more than happy to watch the shoot show. The company scrambled, but honestly, they were so big that our tiny company didn't mean anything to them. So they just treated everyone like shoot, and I left too. Answer: I work for a much smaller company, less than 30 people, and we have an application like that, but it's 25, 30 years old and is still running on original hardware. Anytime we try to convince our CEO to replace it, he just starts talking about how efficient it is and how little storage it uses and how it's not that old. I have zero way to read the tape backups, so I don't even know if they actually work. When this server dies, it will probably take out the company. Story 27. The company didn't crash and burn, but during the pandemic, when the shaped glass guy at the biggest glass plant in Toronto got COVID really bad, all the shaped glass sealed units we got were shoot. Constant errors and problems. When we called to Meanie, they were like, Ernie has COVID. Meanie, you are a multi-million-dollar company. Story 28. My wife worked at a preschool for years. She'd organize and delegate events, decorate for them, and generally just engage with every family that would come through the doors. Several longtime families and co-workers straight up told her she was the face of the school many times. Most parents picked up on that pretty quickly too. Everyone who entered that school knew her to some degree. Over the next 6 months after she finally left, a flood of families followed suit, and she had about 20 different families talk to her about leaving the school. As the sheer chaos, utterly abysmal events, and blatant licensing violations were far too much to handle. She had parents calling her in tears because of how the new administration treated them. Currently, only 3 of her former co-workers are still there. She bailed a little less than a year ago and is now enjoying a paid summer vacation. Story 29. That was me. When I joined the company, they were hemorrhaging money and barely surviving by getting loans from the owner's parents. I identified 2 big reasons: bad shipping estimates and slow client onboarding, because the entire process was manual. In the first month, I put together a framework that turned the really bad manual process of estimating shipping into an automated data-driven process that turned a 30 average loss per shipment into a 20 profit. For onboarding, the client's inventory used to be manually assessed SKU by SKU for international compliance. There were still a lot of errors because the people they had doing this dreadful task were minimum wage and definitely not experts in compliance. The company was able to onboard about 4 clients per month this way. Again, I put together a system that could automatically handle about 95 of the tasks in a fraction of the time with greater accuracy, so before I left, they were able to onboard over 30 clients per month with the same size team. The company made such a turnaround that it got bought by a Fortune 50 company for around 40 Tiranmurra. I even gave a presentation to their CEO on the systems I developed and got about 25K as a bonus for it. However, both of these systems required regular maintenance and good training for end users to make sure that they were being used appropriately. After I left, the systems weren't maintained, and none of the people who I had trained to use the systems were themselves knowledgeable enough about how they work to train others adequately. The company quickly started falling apart to the point that they considered suing the previous owners. Story 30. Company is still there. It's not the kind of business that'll ever really go under, assisted living facility. But I worked at one as a chef where the executive director, the boss of the entire facility, just got it. According to her, everyone's job, from top to bottom, was doing our best to make the residents as happy as possible. To do that, she knew she needed quality staff, and while she couldn't do much compensation as that was above her, she treated everyone well and threw almost monthly employee raffle contests, celebrations. They would raffle off like 65 TVs, pizza ovens, gift cards for massages and stuff. It was cool, kept staff morale high, and the residents loved to see the staff appreciated beyond their thanks. All of the department heads followed her ethos. If the residents requested it and we could reasonably do it, we were to do it, regardless of cost or effort. We blew past budgets monthly, but she argued to corporate we were like 98 full with a ridiculously high resident satisfaction rate compared to other facilities in the area. I think they passed her up for a promotion for like the 3rd or 4th time, and a competitor offered her her dream job with significantly better pay and benefits. None of us could leave her for blaming, as much as we all wanted her to stay. Within 4 months of her last day, 6 out of the 7 department heads had resigned, with several being walked out day of despite giving the required month's notice. The kitchen, our department, held out the longest at like 5.5 months before our culinary director got fed up with 80-hour weeks and being expected to manage a menu on a budget that could barely cover half. While department heads were resigning, a new executive director started, and immediately everything shifted from "it's about the residents" to "they need to learn to live within our budgets." Every new manager cared more about advancing their career or their side businesses than they did about the job, but they religiously stayed within budget. With every new manager, their staff started to leave in droves. It's been under 2 years since I left, and only one of the original 5 chefs is still there. All of them had multiple years of service with the company, and they all left because of how everything changed. It sucks. For those 8 months under the original director, I was honestly the happiest I've ever been at a job. And by the time I left, it was one of, but not even close to, the worst I'd ever had. Edit. Just to add, as soon as the original director left, anything employee appreciation themed beyond an occasional pizza party was gone, including Employee of the Month. After she left, multiple residents began to voice their dissatisfaction with how the facility was being run, especially to us chefs. They didn't blame us, the employees, but several of them who had never shown any aggression to staff regularly talked about telling ex-manager off, and it wasn't a medical mental shift, it was management. Several residents moved out of the facility entirely after the original director left, and noted the change in the service quality was the one reason. One couple moved to another facility to be closer to family and chose to live in a competitor's facility across the street from one of ours in their new location. Story 31. Not the same, but today I stopped by my old workplace to say hi. Wanted to keep some connections open. It's the first time I've seen my old boss since I left. I was underpaid by like $20K a year, had minimal support and respect. Man, I wasn't prepared. In the 6 months I've been gone, my old boss aged more than the 10 years I was there. Startling. Can't say I have any regrets, but darn. Story 32. Worked a cafe job after college. I put my heart and soul into that job. I was working almost every single hour it was possible to be scheduled. I knew the entire regular customer base. Everyone assumed I was the manager. I did 95 of front of house responsibilities. I worked my fudge jerk off all summer. Manager had it out for me. She was a towny mom that had a high school mean girl mentality. As soon as Labor Day passed, she fired me because we just don't need you anymore. I let it go and took it because by that point, I was tired. I've seen her probably 10 times in the last 10 years. She has profusely apologized to me every single time. Says she has so much to be sorry for. The guilt, shame, and defeat is so palpable, written all over her face. I can't imagine how much she realized I did, and how upset people were when I was gone. The owner sold the cafe shortly after I was gone too. I think the manager ran it into the ground. He didn't want to deal with her. Story 33. When I worked at E.F. Hutton, the CEO was pissed that the top broker made more money than he did and let everyone know it. The broker left. Then the company got in trouble for check kiting, which was a form of collecting interest and on money that was supposed to be in non-interest accruing demand deposit accounts. Ego over profits. Meyawari Nanidio. Answer. LOL. Usually check kiting is people writing bad checks and withdrawing money before they have a chance to clear, or rather, before the bank finds out they won't clear. I've never heard of banks doing it, though it kind of sounds like the reverse. Using money you do actually have to make more money, presumably on interbank overnight loans or something. Story 34. Transport company manager that was handling all the accounts in a major city left, got ran off. He had his own company up and running inside of 2 weeks and still handles all those accounts. Original company is still hanging on, but there isn't much left of it. Story 35. The shop manager at a machining and manufacturing shop I worked for was let go. The reasons officially were something about his attitude, but it was because he had cancer and they didn't want to deal with him needing time off. So he gets let go and they bring in a new guy. Goes out of his way to shake things up. Moves people onto projects they had never worked on before, off of what they'd always done. People were doing things they'd never trained for, but the guy who could train them was now doing their old job. Jobs kept getting rejected by QA. So the owner sided with the new shop manager and axed QA and rubber stamped everything. Shame that our clients were the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Postal Service, because once those parts got rejected by them enough times, the work just ended. In 8 months, they laid off 70-something% of the floor workers. Mandatory overtime for the few remaining projects we had. Less than a year later, and they sold the building and a bunch of equipment and moved halfway across the state to a smaller building. Still open, but they went from nearly 100 factory workers and 5 main sales guys to 10 and 1. Answer. I don't understand how people would think this is okay. The government does not fudge around with contracts and paperwork. You don't meet your contract requirements? Good fudge luck out there. In a former job, I dealt with FAA inspections and QA. It was a serious deal. I don't know how anyone could think axing QA on a job with that level of scrutiny would be okay. Story 36. She retired. Suddenly, an important daily report stopped going out. She had been doing it daily for years, no one knew. Also, just as suddenly, no one could figure out how to do it like she did. I believe her boss got fired over it. It was a very public fudge up. Story 37. Years ago, I was the director of operations for a company that had approximately 1,000 employees. I pretty much ran a good portion of the show with everyone under me except for the CEO and president. Unfortunately, someone that controlled the books got a little too friendly with his substances dealer and ended up putting the company up his nose. I took a nice vacation. As I'm getting back to find a job, I get contacted about consulting at a startup that was a virtual carbon copy of my previous company. They agree to pay me a ridiculous amount of money that is mostly production-based. If I don't deliver, I don't get paid much. Anyway, I delivered and I delivered big. Company took off almost immediately, and I knew come the 90-day mark, I was going to get a very healthy check. 90 days hits and I don't get paid. The next day, my contract was not picked up, and I went home with the promise of a check in the mail. I wait a couple of weeks and call the owner looking for my check. Oh, it must have been lost. Blah, 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 nonsense. Fast forward another week, and I get a check that's not signed. Then I get a check for the wrong amount. Once I come to the conclusion they're screwing me, I make one single call that lasts less than 60 seconds. The company that I was consulting for was new in the industry and didn't know me, so the person that called me with an offer was this company's financier, and they also owned the product being sold by this company. I told the owner or the finance company, someone I am quite close friends with, that I delivered everything I said and then some, and they booted me and stiffed me. My buddy tells me he will call me right back. He calls the owner of the company to try to smooth all of this out and apparently gets stonewalled. Anyway, nothing changes. I am still not made whole. My buddy cuts the guy off. No more product to sell, and no more finance company backing the product. Also lost out on the 6 weeks of funded sales due to my buddy needing to be properly reserved for refunds and cancellations. That was nearly 20 years ago, and this still makes me happy. I hope Freddie reads this, and it brings back stinging memories of screwing me out of my contracted pay. Story 38. Didn't leave but died, and pretty much took the business with him. He worked for a driving service that served people with disabilities who couldn't drive, blind, old, etc. He was always courteous and on time. The other drivers were always inconsistent, late, not kind. Once he died, the few other people who were decent left, and the owner just can't handle it now. Story 39. Oh, it was so much more stupid than that. I worked for a company that contracted with doctor offices and hospitals to handle insurance billing. That's what the entire operations department did. They knew all the players on both sides, all the federal and state regulations, and all the places where they could push, tweak, or untangle paperwork and get the money. The company decided to offshore those tasks to India. Well, after India was no longer the country you wanted to offshore anything to, then they laid off the entire ops department. 80 people suddenly without a job. Somewhere around 1,000 worker years of institutional knowledge gone, like you snapped your fingers. It took 2 weeks of absolutely nil productivity, while those of us in IT had to deal with the overseas contractors inventing problems and breaking chutes so they could hide that they had no way to meet their service levels. But the company turned around and rehired as many of the people they'd laid off as possible. To my surprise, they got about 2/3 of them back. People who understand medical billing have never been short of work, but I can see where a lot of them just wanted their old job back. Once they got the ops department back, they put them on training the contractors, which didn't work, and then supervising them, which didn't work. At the time, the company was being purchased by a multinational healthcare corporation and had just signed a contract that more than doubled their client base with one company. First, the new client sued the pants off the company, and when it was clear that company management was actually just as stupid as they sound, the new owners simply took over the clients and systems and shut it down. It quit about a year before all that went down. Honestly, every smart person in IT saw the writing on the wall and went looking for an off-ramp as well. Answer: I left a place that did the exact same thing, laid off all the people that worked with the insurances for funding of medical equipment, shipped everything to India. India had absolutely no clue. Company lost out in huge amounts of funding. Company tried to hire back a bunch of the local people. Most of them told the company to screw off. Left shortly after. I did a job for the company salespeople. They charged the salespeople for my job. Company took in $250,000 from the salespeople. Absolutely free money. They paid me less than a quarter of what they charged. I asked for a raise, was told no money available. The last straw was when I wanted a random Friday off, but was denied because someone in a different state that did a similar job with different salespeople took it off, and we needed coverage. That was on a Monday. By that Friday, I gave my 2 weeks. Story 40. My company is on the verge of this happening. I work in a large hotel in a big city. The hotel is a bit old, built in the early 90s. With its age, the building has constant issues with things like plumbing, the walk-in fridges, ceiling wall leaks during rain, etc. Most of the problems are handled by one guy. He doesn't trust any of the other engineers to do the job as good as he does, so nobody has been trained on a lot of the crucial tasks he does. If he quits, retires, or gets hurt, the hotel is screwed. The utility schematics are so outdated that they aren't accurate anymore. And none of the other engineers knows how things are connected and what to do if there is a breakdown in one of the crucial systems. That's without mentioning that everything is already essentially held together with duct tape and prayers. It's going to be a clusterfuck once he leaves. Story 41. My sales manager left, and all of a sudden, long-term customers started leaving in droves. Turns out the sales manager was spending a ton of money taking them all out and disguising the costs as if he was riding with salesmen and paying for meals and events. Story 42. Not one individual guy, but I worked at a large but struggling media company that was trying to turn the ship around. My team had been doing a full court press on marketing and promotions, and really getting the ratings up on our original programming considerably past where they would have been normally. We were punching way out of our weight class. Well, there was some sort of political struggle in the C-suite, and the result was that our team got eliminated. The ratings went into a passing spiral the very next week. Not exaggerating, things went pear-shaped within days. Eventually, the lack of promotional support led to the entire initiative failing, which led to the bankruptcy and ultimate sale of bits and pieces of the company until it essentially ceased to exist. Story 43. Doji got rid of the entire purchasing department at our NIH institute. The only person who has a purchase card in our department is a PhD in molecular biology. His main role is now purchasing, not science. Also, since the purchase card limit is 10K, we cannot renew the service contract on the analytical instruments that analyze substances for clinical trials. Answer. VA research is taking a beating as well. Assholes are clawing back money approved years ago, cutting the overhead that pays for the various support personnel, etc. Projects are slowing down or stopped. I've been there 30 years, starting as a PhD student in biomedical engineering and becoming a PI for a while. This level of fuckery is off the charts. For the past several years, I've been winding down my commitment. I was down to 25, which let me continue to do interesting work, but left me free of the burdens of a full schedule and, more importantly, of lots of admin nonsense, as my tasks had to be prioritized for what only I could do. Long story short, I now have a grand total of 20 hours, what has up until now been one pay period of 2 weeks at 10 hours a week, that I will get paid for from now until October, at the earliest, but possibly longer, assuming new grants are funded, and at a functional level. I informed one of the PIs I've been doing most of my work for that they need to prioritize what they want from me. For the past 18 months, I had been building an experiment software package that their lab bases a huge portion of its work on, including generating pilot data for getting new grants. They gave me a list of things that would easily take well over 100 hours to design, code, test, and train. I explained that that's not happening. I'm not going to abandon them, so I will do some of it, and it will definitely take more than 20 hours, so I am keeping track of the overage, which may come out of those new grants. Amusingly, some of this is self-inflicted. At the beginning of the year, I got about a 30 increase in my salary to the mid-100s. Now I'm too expensive for the grants that had covered me. LOL. Anyway, I'm now enjoying my greatly relaxed schedule, free of many of the demands placed on me. I think I'll walk the dogs and then go for a bike ride. Edit. At least my health insurance is still being covered. I'm pretty expensive. Story 44. My buddy used to work at a bar and did pretty much everything. Cook, DJ, and barback. Before he left, he said they won't last a month without him. He was right. They shoot down about a month after he left. Story 45. I worked as a local tech for a multi-state IT contractor about 10 years ago. One of the companies I regularly supported was an accounting firm that mainly dealt with company taxes. One of my first visits, I found an old WinXP box in the rack. The only thing I could find on it was that it held a giant ACES database. When I asked what it was for, they told me it held their home-brewed customer info database that tied into some mail merge macros they used for sending out customer correspondence. Not their actual tax processing app, just the customer info. They were deathly afraid of doing anything with it. Just looking at it cross-eyed would cause it to BSOD. I told them that it was so out of date, our monitoring and backup tools would not work on it, and they insisted it was okay as Jane was the only person who did anything with it. Jane was their rather nice older receptionist, who was also the person who built and maintained the DB. She was proud to let anyone know that she learned how to do it after taking some community college classes. She was also the person who fixed it after one of the many crashes would tie it into knots. They also had a beast of a server stack that was drastically overkill for what they used it for. We're talking PowerEdge R920, dual high-end Xeon procs, 64 TB RAM B per proc, plus an MD200 array that was stuffed full as well for well over 100 TB of raw storage. The server only ran AD, some small files shares, and the print server, easily 10 to 15K of hardware. Basically a sports car. They didn't drive over 30 mph. I offered to at least virtualize the XP box to the server, since there would be some kind of redundancy for it with VM backups, plus our already in place cloud backup of their server, but again, they said no thanks. I also suggested moving the DB out of Access and into SQL, as it was a much better solution for a DB of that size and importance. I estimated roughly 20 hours to port the DB and test, or about 10 to build Hyper-V and virtualize the PC. I was also going to tidy up the spaghetti monster of the cabling in their racks during the wait times at no extra cost. I would bring it a couple of more times, but they never went with it. 2 years later, Jane passed away. 3 months after, the XP box finally had a crash that it could not be recovered from as the motherboard fried and took everything else with it. Jane had never showed anyone how the DB or macros worked, and there was no backup of any of it. It took them 6 weeks to find a contractor, purchase and implement an actual CRM suite with CQL, train, and about another 50 hours of billable time from me and my company over that time frame to help them bring it online. Then there was the payroll for the temp they brought in to enter all of the customer info. I don't know the final spend was, but judging from what my billable time was and what some of the other CRMs I've worked with cost, it was a huge expense. Story 46. I just watched a documentary on the Titan sub that imploded. They had a ton of that guy sounding the alarm, but money and ego led to passing. Answer: regulations are written in blood. Lots of entrepreneurs forget that, think they can skip over bureaucracy, and get things done faster. The rules exist for a reason. People bled and died for those rules to exist, to protect others. The people who died on that sub shouldn't have. They died because of one man's ego, who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Something I was told by a friend in Hawaii a few years ago, an engineer with a lot of years of experience, that goes along with this. Stockton Rush hired people right out of school whom he could basically bully into doing what he wanted. Basically, grad students. I was in his garage and he showed me a 20 Ritchie Chrétien telescope he had there, ready to use, just gathering dust. He said I could have it for free. I just need to ship it to myself back home to the mainland. I was excited for a few minutes until he explained the origin of the scope. See, it had been built for a research project. They spent about $2 million on it all. It was to use the scope to analyze upper atmospheric gas concentrations using the light reflected from the moon as the baseline. Grad students who had never built a telescope before built this thing out of plate steel and bolts every 2 inches. It weighed about 1,500 lbs. I passed. Amount that could handle that would be $300K. It was a lesson. Get an expert to design something, and it will cost less overall. His job was to build remote telemetry systems. He built them for years for oil and gas companies in Alaska. He knew what off-the-shelf systems could be bought or put together for $200 that would take a grad student $5K and months of effort to design and build from scratch. You pay a premium for that knowledge, but you save a lot more in time and money. If you listen, of course. Story 47. The company didn't crash and burn, but I had a top 10 customer at my old company. They didn't compensate me for it and gave all the associated comp to an older dude who was the head of my division. I asked around and was told that it wasn't my customer, blah, blah. So I made a formal appeal, and right after they told me I needed to leave the company and tried to block me from the customer account. So I left. My new company more than doubled my compensation immediately. Customer came with me to the new company, which has since bonused me for the customer account as well. Old company was shocked Pikachu face when the customer walked with me. Felt pretty good, I can't lie. Story 48. The company I used to work for was purchased specifically for the product my division worked on. A month after purchase, they closed my division and let all of us go transferring out work to another division who had no clue what they were doing. 6 months later, the product they wanted had to be discontinued because they had fudged up beyond use. 6 months after that, the other division was closed down, eliminate off their product as well. The buyer spent tens of millions of dollars and had an entire multi-year strategic plan flushed down the toilet in a year, all because they closed the wrong division, thinking they could save money by hiring cheaper and less skilled staff in a worse IT market. It is worth noting their save money math never worked from the start. I found out they budgeted to hire 5 people to replace just me. Yes, I was making more than the people in the other division, but I wasn't anywhere near 5 times more. I didn't even make enough to cover 2 people to replace me. Story 49. Carvana. They crashed and burned, but recovered pretty darn well. I wish them well, honestly. They treated me so well. But I was a manager there. Their website was built on Salesforce. Part of the reason I was basically the go-to guy for difficult cases was that I could dig through Salesforce well and others didn't, because the company really only trained on their UI, which made really good sense. But it was fed through Salesforce. The IT people who set the Salesforce up all left. They had no idea what to do and had to constantly pay the expensive license for SF, even though we didn't regularly use it, It would have just been too expensive to shut everything down and switch to their proprietary software, even for a day. It would throw a wrench in thousands of transactions. Answer: that's the sort of situation in which the Salesforce people should have been on high alert trying to help keep the account live. It's well worth it for them to grease the wheels for a big corporate client. But Salesforce has a racist twithead for a CEO and is also running itself into the ground by firing all the people who actually understand their business. So whoops. Story 50. The person who knew the industry left. The Bozo board brought in 4 people in 3 years after he was gone to take over. All they did was trash the company. They didn't know the market customer base, competition, products, sales cycle, and on and on. Oh, so why did they let him go? To save. Brilliant. Story 51. Head of tax left, then finance, then HR went on a tour telling everyone everything was fine. Reader, things were not fine. Story 52. No one left. The CEO that was on a very long sabbatical came back, just destroyed any culture, morale, progress, etc. People left in drives, including me. Story 53. It was myself in a reception dispatch and our accounts admin, the only 2 admin for the entire office in a steel sheet manufacturing business. Management didn't know how to do either of our jobs and didn't bother learning before we both left within 2 weeks of each other. Last I heard, the company was fudge up big time, as they weren't able to pay their employees super, as the account was still linked to the other admin's phone number. Answer: the company was fudge up big time, as they weren't able to pay their employees super, as the account was still linked to the other admin's phone number. If that is auto super via 0, literally all they have to do is have the account admin raise a support ticket, or failing that, just set up the ATO clearinghouse and pay it that way. Jesus, they really are incompetent or don't care. Story 54. The new guy didn't drink, sales crashed. I knew about a guy who was running a factory in Turkey for a big worldwide known company. He did a good job and got promoted to Continental Director, the 2nd tier in that company. About a year later, he was asked to go back to the factory to find out why sales went down dramatically. So he went back and found out the factory was running well. The products were still good. He couldn't find anything wrong. They just didn't sell. So he called the most important former customers that stopped buying. Their customers were nearly all from the former Soviet Union, mostly Russians. They had the habit of celebrating a contract with a night out before the signing, as there is a belief you can only trust people you had some drinks with. They all told him they didn't sign extensions, as they didn't trust the new manager, because he declined to drink adult beverage at all. Story 55. Not a crash, but I bet it hurt as hell. The big company I worked for bought small family-driven competitor for a low 8-figure amount. The contract stated that the owner of the small company can't work in the field anymore. He accepted under the condition that his son can work at the big company. Son worked there for 5 years, gathered intel, and left to build his own company with dad's money. 80 of the acquired customers instantly moved with the son and wanted to work with the small family business they had good relations with in the past. Story 56. In China, there was a restaurant I used to go to all the time. I was going there almost daily. It was a short walk from the kindy I was teaching at, about 100 meters. But there were a lot of restaurants that close. The reason I went to that one was because the food was brilliant. The guy who cooked for them was really good. Anyway, they got so popular, they could no longer fit all their customers in, so they moved to a new place about 5 times larger in a new mall that opened up. The cook asked for a raise and they fired him. I asked some Chinese friends why the food in the new place sucked, and they told me. I went to the new place twice, once to see if it was just as good, and it wasn't. That was when I asked my friends what happened. One last time a few months after that to see if they improved, and they hadn't. Beautiful new premises, but who cares if the food is shoot? I go there to eat, not look. They used to pack in 30 or 40 people at their old restaurant. The new one had room for 200, and I used to see 5 to 10 people there. There were nearly as many staff as customers. Within a year, they closed down. All because they were too greedy to give their cook a raise. Story 57. So, in the mid-90s, Shell Canada hired a star management consultant from the Netherlands to come into one of the Ontario chem plants with the goal of cutting costs within 5 years without affecting output to keep the plant economically viable. He was about 33 years old and spent a couple weeks conducting interviews while wearing a 1000 suit. His solution was to offer every employee over 50 who had 20-year service a buyout. These were union gigs, and by 20 years of service, they were all making at least double that of new hires. The buyout that the union agreed to was 80 of wages for 5 years, and keeping full pension at 65 as though they never stopped working. They'd replace the 30 or so veteran employees with 10 new contract hires from India. And even being on the hook for 80 of those salaries means savings in the short term. And after 5 years, big savings. The Indian contractors wouldn't have dental pension included in their contracts, so no big deal about the pension deals either. With a total workforce of 200 at that facility, who's going to notice the difference? Big company farewell. All the early retirees are worried about a job outlook that's looking pretty grim in the 90s. But one of them knows a consultancy firm that would love to add them all to the roster, and within a month, many have signed big contracts to work in the Middle East at salaries that, when combined with their crazy severance packages, mean they can retire after a few years. The problem was that several critical systems at the Shell facility relied on some old 1970s digital computers, the kind that were multiple giant circuit boards encased in big clear plastic boxes with big red digital calculator-style displays, accompanied by 5,000-page spiral-bound handbooks with instructions for interpreting and programming via the numeric interface. These had a few decades of handwritten notes and tweaks further complicating things. None of the remaining employees or new hires had ever used these. Every time they needed to, they'd just get one. Lawyers, what was the dumbest thing that won or lost you a case? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Not my story, but one I heard as a young lawyer, illustrating the dangers of asking too many questions on cross-examination. The lesson being to quit while ahead. Don't ask open-ended questions that allow the witness a chance to explain. The case was about a vicious fight outside a bar. The accused was accused of biting the victim's nose off. The only witness was an elderly fellow who saw the whole thing. On direct, the witness said he saw the two fighting in a whole crowd of brawlers from across the street at night. The defense cross went something like this. Q. I see you are wearing glasses here in court. Are you nearsighted? A. Yes. Q. From the police report, it says you were not wearing your glasses that night. I. Yes, I ran out of my house without them when I heard the riot. Q. Again, from the police report, it was particularly dark and foggy that night. There was only a single light above the bar, and you were 100 feet away. Is that correct? A. Yes. Q. So you admit you are nearsighted, that the visibility conditions were not good. You could not possibly have been able to see exactly what happened 100 feet away from you, correct? A. Well, yes, but Q. Please just answer the question. A. Yes, sir, and here the lawyer ought to have sat down. Instead, they opened their mouth and asked the fatal question. Q. So given you admit you could not have seen exactly what happened, why did you testify it was my client who bit off the victim's nose? It could have been any one of those fighting A, because later, your client ran right past me and spat a severed nose onto my shoe. The latter bit had not been in the police report and was not mentioned on direct. Answer. Vinnie Gambini. Mrs. Riley, when you saw the defendants, were you wearing your glasses? Constance Riley. Yes, I was. Vinnie Gambini. Pointing upward and Mrs. Riley not looking in his direction. Over here, dear. Would you mind putting your glasses on for us, please? Vinnie Gambini. Stumbling a bit from staring into Mrs. Riley's eyes through her very thick glasses. Whoa! How long you been wearing glasses? Constance Riley. Since I was 6. Vinnie Gambini. Have they always been that thick? Constance Riley. Oh no, they've gotten thicker over the years. Vinnie Gambini. So, as your eyes have gotten more and more out of whack, as you've gotten older, how many different levels of thickness have you gone through? Constance Riley. Oh, I don't know. Over 60 years, maybe 10 times. Vinnie Gambini. Maybe you're ready for a thicker set. Constance Riley. Oh no, I think they're okay. Vinnie Gambini. Maybe we should make sure. Let's check it out. Vinnie Gambini, grabbing a